Hey everyone, this is Daria.
And this is Pepe.
And welcome to Everything is Sustainability. We are two professionals in the field of sustainability, and in every episode we go over a topic related to sustainability, trying to explain its complexities for people who might not have a background in this field.
This is our second episode. But before we jump into it, let's do a little recap. In the last episode, we gave you guys a general introduction to and defined what sustainability is. Just as a reminder, sustainability is meeting the needs of today without compromising the needs of the future.
And we should also remember, it's a balance between environment, society, and economy. Now let's move on to today's episode. Tradition to transition, sustainability of the windmills.
This topic is interesting because it is a bit more applied than our last episode. Instead of only explaining a concept, today we will put sustainability in practice.
And today's main topic is energy transition. You must have heard of the trend of leaving fossil fuels and switching to renewable energy sources. One of these renewables is wind power. In this episode, we're going to discover how this energy transition works in real life while trying to balance the pillars of sustainable development.
This episode is special because we will be talking about research that Daria did for her master's thesis. She conducted this research in the island of Crete in Greece.
This project is really important to me because I got to spend some time in Crete with locals who shared their time and knowledge and food with me, and more importantly, their raki. I want to pay my respects by sharing their tradition and story.
So, let's get started with it. Okay, Daria, so could you give us a little summary of what your thesis was about? What did you do in it?
Of course. So my thesis is focused on renewable energy transition. So you know the trend that we are changing our energy sources from fossil fuels to renewable energy sources like wind and solar. And my thesis is about this renewable energy transition and how this new energy systems can be democratic.
Okay. What do you mean by the energy system itself being democratic?
So energy and society is interconnected. And energy systems are in fact socio-technical regimes. So what does it mean? Energy system is not just an engineering project, some infrastructure or electricity it produces. It's not simply this. It also has impacts on the society. So society and technology are interconnected. Technology shapes society, but also society should shape technology. And I want to give you an example about cars. So for instance, the fact that we're using cars, we have to use cars in our daily lives to transport. We built roads for it, and we built cities around the fact that we are using cars on daily lives. So this is how the technology is shaping the society. And in the socio-technical regimes, society also shapes the technology.
So in the case of socio-technical regimes, like you mentioned with cars, it's like the example that in the United States, a lot of the newer vehicles are becoming bigger, like SUVs and trucks, and they're increasingly more built in a particular shape because that's what the society demands. And it's not necessarily more the technology, it's also what people expect socially of their vehicles, of their cars.
So it goes both ways.
It goes both ways.
Technology affects society and society affects technology. And if energy systems are a part of technology, then it should be affected by society itself. So energy systems in that terms, and as I explained in my thesis, is a socio-technical regime.
And in this case of socio-technical regimes about energy, then you would be talking about, for example, installing like home batteries as they are doing or renewables? Or what do you mean about like the society affecting the energy system?
So in this case, like to answer your question, I think we should also mention energy democracy. So let's look at the traditional energy system. It is large infrastructures and they're built by certain companies or governmental agencies. It's owned by public or private sector. It is quite technocrat. Engineers design it to make it efficient as possible, and private sector makes money out of that. And they sell the energy that they produced. And in this case, the citizens, the consumers, are simply recipients of the energy. So they don't have any say how the energy system is working, how can be more efficient for them, or how can be better for them, or they don't have any benefits out of the energy system. So they are very, very passive.
So in this case, it's more like a company, for example, that's making a product.
Yes.
That product is the energy and the people
Yes.
just consume it, just buy it.
Exactly. But they also don't have any other options. They can't be like, oh no, I want to be off-grid. I don't want to buy energy from this company, because it's also a monopoly. It's owned by one, most of the time, company, and they make the most profit out of it because people have to buy energy, right? They have to buy electricity.
Of course, some people can go off-grid, but that's like the very rare case, and it's not a normal thing. The
But
normal
also,
expected thing is to still be connected.
But in European Union, it is illegal to be off-grid.
Oh, really? Is it?
If you're producing it, like it has like very, very rare cases that it's acceptable for you to be off-grid. But most of the time, if you are living in a town that's has grid, it's connected, you can't be off-grid. You can't be just like, I'm disconnecting myself from the national energy system and I'm just going to produce my own energy and I'm going to use it. So I'm not going to pay any bills because I'm producing my own energy. So it's like as if growing your own tomato. You can actually grow your own tomato and stop buying it from the market. But in terms of electricity, in terms of energy, it's not possible. The EU doesn't allow you to do that.
Okay, so it's a bit more of a forced monopoly. So where people have to participate in this.
Exactly.
And so energy democracy is trying to give that control back to the people. So
exactly.
To make a system where the people are the ones also producing, but that it's not the people independently producing the energy. It's more of them banding together and making sort of a rival to that company monopoly that they have on energy.
It takes back the power from private sector and gain it back as citizens or as local communities. So energy democracy refers to, it asks this question like, who makes the decision about my energy system or who benefits from the energy that's been produced? And it also tries to find an answer to how citizens can meaningfully participate in the energy system.
Okay, understand. And this research, it was done in a specific area, right? It was done in?
Yeah, I had a case study and it's Lasiti Plateau in Greece. And I want to tell a little bit of the Lasiti Plateau. It is located in Crete, but it's not on the shore, but it is actually quite far from the sea. It's a mountainous region, and because it's surrounded by mountains, it's historically quite autonomous. It is an agricultural community, so the main profession is agriculture, and they don't have enough water resources to use in the irrigation, and they used windmills to extract underground water to use it for irrigation purposes. Lasiti Plateau is also the oldest aeolian park in the world, and its peak, I think it was supposed to be like 13,000 windmills in the plateau, and every family in every farm had 1, 2, or 3, I don't know, as many as they want. They would dig a well, and then they would build a windmill with the local resources in the plateau, and they would extract water. Windmills also regulated the daily life in Lasiti Plateau. So it created local professions. It created relationship between neighbors. One of the things that you need to know about windmills is that they require daily attention. So according to the wind, you have to open or close the sails of the cotton fabric and the windmills. You need to open them or close them. If you don't close them when it's too windy, then you break the windmill. So you need to care for them all the time. But imagine on a daily life as a farmer, I don't know, you need to go and graze the sheep. You need to, I don't know, taking care of something else, and you're not always watching the windmill. So what happens is that your neighbor steps in. Your neighbor knows that you're not at home, and they would take care of your windmill when you're not around. It regulates the social relations in the plateau as well. It is some sort of the glue for society.
All right. So you talked about these windmills in Lasiti Plateau, and we talked about energy democracy. So how these two things relate? What is the process that is ongoing in Lasiti Plateau in this case?
Okay, so the thing is that, as I told you, the plateau is a mountainous area. And a few years ago, maybe 5, I don't remember, the big companies wanted to build wind turbines on the top of the mountains. And local community, they fiercely rejected this idea because they don't want wind turbines in their so close to hometowns, their communities. And one of the reasons for that, they use mountains
for sheep grazing.
For sheep grazing, exactly. And it's also some of the things that they used. When I was visiting there, you could see so many sheep and goats. And every morning, the shepherds, they used to like wake up in the 4 a.m. They would bring their sheep and goats to the mountains to graze them and bring back them in the sunset. So if they were to put wind turbines on it, they're not just putting wind turbines, they're also building roads to bring the wind turbines to the mountains. So they were going to disrupt the areas, and it was going to disrupt the shepherds' daily activity to graze the sheep, graze the animals.
So in this case, the wind turbines, sort of like any other project that is in the world where it's the big wind turbines installed by a foreign or maybe a national company, but it isn't necessarily like the community itself. And then it causes, like, as you said, they have to build roads. And I imagine that they also have to block off access because, of course, wind turbines are big machines. So it is kind of dangerous to approach them, and they would prefer to leave them alone, they being the companies, so that people don't vandalize or damage them or aren't damaged by them, for example. So in this case, how is it that there could be an example of energy democracy in the Lasiti Plateau?
So because the local community didn't want this big wind turbine project, they came up with their own solutions and saying that, okay, you know what, we have this traditional beautiful windmills and maybe we can use this tradition to produce electricity within the community. So we won't need the wind turbines, but we're going to produce our own electricity. And the project started here. It is a big project called Crete Valley, and it is it's actually a Horizon Europe project. And the local university in Crete, Hellenic Mediterranean University, proposed to design the energy system using the traditional design of the windmill and turn it into electricity producing one instead of water extracting one.
All right. So in this case, they would replace the existing windmills, or would they build new windmills?
No, they would build new ones.
New ones alongside the ones that they already have.
Well, yes, but because all of them are almost abandoned, it doesn't really matter. Like the old ones, they're abandoned, so you cannot make any use of those.
All right. So in this case, this installation of wind turbines sounds to be a good thing, right? Because they would allow for more energy independence. And of course, the natural good conclusion is that they also have a smaller environmental impact than the modern energy system, which is more reliant on fossil fuels, for example. So what is the issue with these new windmills in Lasiti Plateau?
Well, there are several issues with it. So first of all, when you look at the traditional windmills, they have 8 sails and they're beautiful. And Hellenic Mediterranean University designed one windmill looking exactly like the traditional one. And they tested it both in Crete in the university and in Lasiti Plateau. And the problem is that it's not producing enough electricity because the 8 sails is simply not efficient to produce electricity. So what they did is that they kind of reduced the numbers of the sails and they reduced it to 3. The 3 sails windmills. But the problem is now that local community, of course some people still support it, but some people, they don't really like the fact that it doesn't look like the traditional ones. And in my fieldwork, I've actually heard one community member saying that if it doesn't look like the traditional one, she's not going to support it and she's not going to buy it.
In this case, of course, I have some opinions since I am an engineer, and in my bachelor's degree, for example, I did study energy production and energy systems. I know the principle. Of course, there's a lot of physics involved behind it, but basically it summarizes in that the best way to capture wind while still letting it go through, so the maximum amount of energy that you can get from the wind, is with 3 sails, as you call them. So in this case, of course, I would side more with the engineering side of thinking, of course, it needs to be efficient. If it doesn't produce energy, it wouldn't provide this energy independence. Of course, I understand you do need the consent of the people to put such a project in Crete, as you mentioned. But taking, for example, the person that you mentioned, I would question whether it is actually important how the windmills look. If the people agree to the project of installing windmills, shouldn't they leave the design of the machines themselves to the engineers? After all, it's a machine. It has to work before it has to look a particular way. Or at least that's what I would think.
So this is a quite engineering point of view. And it is correct. If you're designing an energy system, it should be efficient. If it's not efficient, there's no point of using that. But we also should not overlook the power of the society. If an engineering project, however good it is, if it's not socially acceptable, it's going to go to garbage because no one's going to use it. And in this case, I think they should not make 8-sail windmills just because some of the members of the local community want it. But they should include local community into decision-making process of the energy system. And in this case, it is actually, to me, it's quite simple. It's like raising a children. If you ask your child, do you want to eat a cauliflower or broccoli tonight? And if the person feels like he has a choice, they make a choice and they're going to be okay with the consequences of that decisions. So it's again a top-down project. The engineers who don't know the Lasiti Plateau, who are not from there and who's not visiting there, making certain decisions about the local community, and they're just implementing those decisions in the community, and community feels like, why this stranger who I don't know, who doesn't know me, is making important decisions about my life. And it feels, I don't know, if invaded maybe?
Sort of like imposing a decision just because
Exactly.
it's the most efficient one.
So it's like a technocratic regime. So it's like the engineer decides for it, and as a consumer, you just have to deal with it. And how is different than the traditional energy systems that we have with this large fossil fuel infrastructures?
Okay, so in that case, that the university designing these windmills could involve the local population, or maybe they could, I don't know, be more informative about what they're doing, sort of including them, but also not necessarily using the population for all the decisions. Maybe in the case of a technological decision, which is more limited by, of course, the physical constraints, in that case, maybe they could serve as an explanation. Isn't the university also a local institution?
You're right, it's a local university. But of course, if engineers wants to inform the community members, they can do it. But I think it's also not their job. I think who should do it is the regional authorities, local authorities, who's also a stakeholder in the project, which is region of Crete or the local municipality in Lasiti Plateau. They should be the one who is going to the community and giving seminars to explain at which state they are about the project, because something that we saw during the fieldwork is that local people has no idea about what's going on with the project. They just hear some certain things, but it is most of the time what they discuss in their local coffee shops. For a foreigner, like I am, a student comes from Belgium, I knew more about it because I had the access to talk with the different stakeholders, including engineers, and ask questions about it. But the local person, they should not be following engineers around to ask questions about their own community. I think it should be vice versa.
Okay, and in that case, do you think that increasing the amount of information that these people have, would that make it more likely for them to accept such a project or to participate in it? Or does it not have any relation?
No, I think they should definitely increase the acceptance of this project. If locals know more about it, they could be more engaged about it. And it would be easier for them to accept this project because they also don't understand why they're not using the traditional design. Also, these people are not engineers. I'm also not an engineer, so I also learned the fact that 3 blades are the optimum number of cells to produce energy. And these people, they don't know about it. So of course, someone needs to go and explain them why the traditional design is not really possible.
And even in the case where they don't agree with it, that also gives them more power to actually make decisions that leads the project to become something that they actually want, correct?
Yes, that's true.
Okay, so in the end, what issues would you say that there were in the implementation of this project?
So first of all, the local community is not informed. They don't know anything about what's going on, and it creates a big gap between the project itself and the community that's going to be affected by it. And when I ask why there is this gap to some of the stakeholders, why local community doesn't know anything about the project, some of the things they told me, some of the excuses they had is the fact that, there are some restrictions to communicate with them, and one of them being community members not having higher education. So what I mean is that they're being condescending. They mean that, even though we're explaining to them, it's going to be difficult for them to understand, so why bother? I'm not sure if that's what they're in mind, but this is how it's perceived at this point.
So in this case, could there be any possibility for, as you mentioned, there's a local university, and in this communication that we mentioned before, for the university or the government to provide some technical education to the local people? After all, these windmills are going to be installed in their backyard. It's going to be installed in the region. Is there a way for them to receive maybe some introduction or maybe some basics on how the technical stuff works for these windmills?
So I also interned in the Hellenic Mediterranean University in the mechanical engineering department. And I'm not an engineer, as I said. And to this day, I have no idea what they're doing. But once they explained it to me, why we should use 3 blades instead of 8 blades, I understand it. I don't know what's the mechanics, but once the engineer is explaining to me, I said, okay, if that's the case, I accept it. I don't have a problem with that. And also, the people in the Lasiti Plateau, they have this big tradition of windmills. These people installed these windmills themselves, and they maintained it themselves. They had no higher education about it. I met some people in there and their technical knowledge is as good as an engineer. Of course, about windmills only, because their life in the past depended on this. If they cannot extract underground water, there is no food for the family. So of course they know how the windmills are working very well. So of course when it's explained, they have capacity to understand that. The problem is that there is no explanation. And I think in the project itself, so what was my result of the research is that they are on purpose excluded from the decision-making process. They didn't include it in any stage of the design of the energy system. They're even excluded from the experience phase. So for instance, the new windmill with the 3 blades, 3 sails, not blades actually, because there is also like cloth in between sails. It has been tested in Hellenic Mediterranean University on the campus and on the public places in La City, Plato. But it's not tested in someone's backyard. Then they don't collect feedbacks from the local people. So it means that what if it's too noisy? If it's too noisy, no one's going to use it. They're not collecting feedback from the locals, from the people who are actually going to use it and also suffer the consequences of having a windmill on their backyard. The fact that they're excluded, it shows that this is a top-down project and it's a technocratic regime. It's not fossil fuels, it's renewable energy, but the ethics behind it is as traditional as the fossil fuel ones.
So in the end, it's only solving sort of the technical and environmental issue of the energy production, but it in itself is not a new model. It's sort of replacing what we could call maybe a bad dictator with a better dictator, but it's still a dictator in terms of who provides your energy.
That's true. So it is touching the environmental pillar and maybe the economical pillar. It's something completely else. We can also discuss that, but it doesn't really touch the social pillar of sustainability. And then I ask, is this new project sustainable? Just because it's producing electricity from a renewable source, is it enough to be a sustainable project? I don't know.
Okay, of course. So you mentioned, of course, the environmental pillar, which regardless of which project it is, if it is a renewable project, that is an improvement. And we mentioned the social pillar, there where it doesn't seem to be much improvement or no improvement at all. And in the economical pillar, I feel like it would be interesting to discuss this. How would this affect, for example, the economy of the place?
So first of all, what I should say is that before, when they had the traditional windmills, these windmills, they've been produced locally and by the local people. So the governance of the windmills, it belonged to community itself. But now it is going to be, it cannot be produced by locals anymore. It should be industrialized. So it should be produced in some factory. Probably it's going to be in China to make it cheaper. And they will be sold to whoever wants to invest in it. And the locals who used to not only produce but install themselves, they also cannot do it anymore. So there should be a professional technician coming over to the farm, to their backyard and putting it together. And once it's installed, it needs to be connected to grid. Because according to EU regulations, you cannot live off grid. So if you're producing your own energy, a solar, if you have a windmill, whatever you have to connect it to the national electricity system.
Okay, so the issue seems to be where there would be some economic displacement. The economic benefits that were originally kept within the community are being taken somewhere else. So a big company would be producing them.
Yes.
And a big company would be sending in the technician. And
Yes.
it basically makes this a more globalized system, but also it sort of disconnects it from the local community.
Yes.
You also mentioned the issues with, for example, bureaucracy, with the EU legislation about being able to live off-grid.
Yes.
Is there a way where basically all of this can be changed, where this can be modified? For example, maybe the production can be moved back to become a local production. Maybe the maintenance they can train locals. As we mentioned, they have the capacity to understand these systems. Is there a possibility to establish maybe a training program? And maybe is there a way to simplify maybe the regulations or to change the current legal models that exist to allow for these people to install these new windmills and make it into a more communitarily accepted project?
Well, first of all, you should not really hope for EU to change their legislations or Greece to change their national laws at all. You should not really count on that. But can it be locally produced? Actually, yes. But problem is that I think it has something to do with like generally capitalism and globalization. You can produce in Greece for, I don't know, for 10 euros, let's say, but you can produce it in China for 2 euros. And it depends on what company wants to do with it, like how much money they want to make out of it. I would support the fact that this project, which comes from La City, Lassiti plateau, from their own local traditions, it should be also produced in Greece, in Crete. But I don't know how feasible that is. When it comes to the maintenance of the windmills or the technicians that they need to install the windmills, one of the things that's been discussed in the project is also they should like train the locals as technicians. So the new project is actually can revive the local community. About the production of the windmill. Honestly, my professor in Hellenic Mediterranean University, Professor Dimitris Christakis, wanted to create a manual to show how locals can produce their own windmills. But the problem is that you have all the resources in the island and all the machines that you need to produce a local windmill. But the problem is that because these windmills are going to be connected to national grid, they need to be certified. And you cannot certify each windmill that's produced by local. So also certification takes $500,000 for only one windmill. That's also why you can only certify one type of windmill. Because what I thought when I heard about this design conflict between locals and the university, I thought to myself, why they don't just produce both of them, like the one with 3 sails and the one with 8 sails, and certify both of them, and then people just choose whichever they want to. If they want to just look it pretty, they buy the 8 sails one. They don't care about the electricity it produces. But the problem is that no one has $500,000 to certify one windmill.
Okay, yeah. So from all of what you've explained today, I understand that this project seems to be like it could go either way. It could be just another regular wind farm. It's just another system where a big company comes in and installs regular wind turbines. And of course, they get the benefits of renewable energy that is generally cheaper and less polluting than fossil fuels. But this project also seems to have the capacity and basically like the bones of a good project where it could become something better that is actually sustainable in its entirety, and not only in its environmental capacity, if it involves the people, if there is a way to overcome this regulatory burden, so much bureaucracy with the approval of the windmills and with certification or with the installation and connection to the grid, and also with the social pillar, if we consider of involving the people in decisions that they can make of how the windmills are designed, where they are placed, and also involving them in the maintenance.
Exactly. It has great potential. It was born in the society. It was born within the community, this project. But because of, it's also maybe the nature of project management in Europe, it has so many layers. There's the local community, yes, and there's the regional authorities, there is the national government, and there is EU. And when you include EU, which you have to because the funding comes from there, it makes it extremely complicated, and bureaucracy takes so much time. When I was there, the university wanted actually to build more prototypes to test it out in the Lassiti plateau as well. But the problem was that the funding wasn't there. And because of that, they have to postpone this plan of making more prototypes and testing. But when you ask this to regional authorities, why aren't you cutting the funding? And what their answer is that we're not cutting anything. If we have the money right now, we would give. But this bureaucracy with EU takes so much time that we cannot grant the money right away whenever the engineers want. I think they were really genuine about it. If they had the money, I'm pretty sure they could give, but it's too complicated and it takes so much time. And honestly, the longer it takes for a project to be implemented, the less interesting it becomes, or people don't have patience to wait for it. I don't know. It just gets more annoying and boring, I guess.
So this is a really good example of how sustainability can have its hurdles, how it's difficult to implement it in this very complex world and this very complex system that we have. Of course, last episode we talked about the 3 pillars and that it involves, of course, the environment and the society. And all of that sounds really easy and it sounds beautiful when you talk about it in abstract terms. But once you try to apply it here, as this project in the Lassiti Plateau is trying to apply it, it becomes a whole different situation. It is difficult to implement sustainability, but that doesn't mean that we have to stop trying.
Yeah, that's true. Let's not be discouraged.
In the contrary, we should keep trying to implement these sustainability initiatives. We should keep trying to fight, and research such as the one done by my colleague Delia is important research, as it shows us where we are lacking in sustainability projects. It teaches us how to maybe improve these projects, how to benefit what needs to be included. And for example, in most cases of sustainability, I believe this would be the case where society is often the most ignored pillar.
Exactly. It's absolutely. It's even there is like so many times social pillar is referred as forgotten pillar. So most of the time, if it's economically viable, if it's environmentally possible, the project is good. We can move on with that. They really overlooked how the project is going to affect the local community.
So overall, these sustainability projects have to involve environment, of course. It has to involve the economy, of course. But most importantly, it also has to involve the society. And I believe the example of the Lasiti Plateau in Greece shows that without social involvement and without social participation, a project cannot really truly be called completely sustainable.
Exactly.
So we've come to the end of our second episode. Thank you to our listeners. Thanks, Mom, for sticking around.
And I would love to thank to everyone who made this research possible, to the community in Lasiti Plateau, to my supervisors Peter and Xenia, and my dear professor Dimitris Christakis from Crete.
As always, we publish a new episode every 6 weeks on Spotify, YouTube, or the website of Orimag, www.orimag.com.tr.
And with that, we are your friendly neighborhood sustainability buddies, and we look forward to seeing you in the next episode.
Bye-bye.